Você sabe quais ofensas criminais podem afetar o seu status imigratório aqui nos Estados Unidos? Esse é o tópico de hoje no Cruzando Fronteiras. Olá, eu sou Renata Lily White, advogada de imigração, e hoje nós vamos conversar com a doutora Luisa Alejos, advogada criminal aqui no estado da Geórgia, e essa entrevista será conduzida em inglês com legendas em português e espanhol. Hi, Luisa.
Hi,
thank you so much for talking to us today about criminal law and implications of immigration law, the intersection between these two areas of law. And please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Renata. I am Luisa Alejos. I am the solo practitioner of my law firm, LPA Law. We are located in Marietta, and we have satellite offices in Canton and in Midtown. My focus is primarily criminal defense and personal injury, so some civil litigation that goes into that. But I started out doing criminal defense, and like you say, Renata, there's a big intersection in what we call crimmigration. So it's so important for people to understand how they intersect, but beyond that, how important it is to have the right team on board when they're facing a legal issue.
Yeah, Luisa, and this is a very important topic nowadays because I think the immigrant community in the United States are very scared with recent laws passed by not only Congress or House of Representatives, like the here in Georgia, the Lake and Riley Act, and we want to talk about the implications of criminal offenses in immigration status. I know you have a lot of clients from the Brazilian community and the Hispanic community also, and how are they perceiving these changes? Have you noticed people more, concerned about it? Have you talked to a lot of people about it?
Absolutely, in several different ways. I think at the onset, it was more of people trying to get everything in order. They didn't really quite know what to expect, and I'm sure you've seen that, right? Where people come to you like, hey, now I need to do something, And from a criminal defense perspective, people are very afraid to go to court. So we get more and more calls of things that perhaps they would even want to handle themselves. And the bonus to that is this gives us an opportunity, and you an opportunity with this show, to educate people further, because even something as simple as a traffic ticket can have implications in the future. So some people are just like, oh no, just pay it, right? They don't even know that they can contest it if there's a basis.
Yes.
So it kind of comes with like I said, the bonus aspect of being able to educate people a little bit further and say, hey, we can actually do better than that. So beyond that, it's just a general fear, like a general, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
It's just like this environment,
Yes. And I'm seeing the same thing with immigration law. A lot of people are scared of going to interviews or ICE check-ins, where they used to go, it used to be a simple procedure. And right now they are even scared of going to a citizenship interview by themselves. So it is scary. But let's talk a little bit about the type of offenses, the most common offenses that you see in your office with the immigrant community, and that it could have an impact in their immigration status. What are the most common offenses you see?
Yeah, probably number one would be the driving without a license, right?
It's very common.
Yeah, and it's understandable. I think, I always tell people, don't drive if you don't have a license, because that is actually the law.
Yeah.
However, we know things are very difficult for people.
People have to work.
Like, you gotta live. We understand. So, that's probably the most common, and there are things that we can do. What I think people don't understand, because again, you have some clients that are like, oh no, this is like my second or third one and I just pay it and I'm fine. I'm like, well, no, there's actual jail time that's involved with it though. And maybe the first time you didn't have it because maybe they arrested you and that satisfies the time served, on the front end. And so from your perspective, it was just a fine, but that's not quite how that goes. So if we can mitigate as much as we can, that's going to be helpful to them. Because then, if you're undocumented in this country and you're in jail for a traffic offense, like a no driver's license, or, no insurance or something like that, what are the odds these days that you get an ICE hold placed? Like, you need to mitigate
very
that.
High chance.
These days, you don't want to be in a position where
It's
you're
a
in
high
jail.
risk. Yeah.
Right. And then, maybe you get bond, and maybe you're able to bond out. Maybe you get bond and you have a nice hold. And then there's no point in the bond, and you don't, but then it just spirals, as you know.
Yeah, and for immigration purposes, right now, we had a BIA decision, the Board of Immigration Appeals decision in July 2025 that says that people who enter the country without admission or parole, they are subject to mandatory detention. So they are not getting a bond from an immigration judge either.
Yeah, you're the one that told me that, and I thought that makes perfect sense. So the risk is so much higher now than it's ever been. So I would say that, is probably the most common one. Then probably a DUI would be the second most common. And DUI is a whole practice area in itself. We could spend a lot of time talking about it. But honestly, like we should not be drinking and driving.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't. I think I'm going to anticipate one of your future questions and talk about constitutional rights, because I think a common misconception, and I'm all about, cooperating and respecting law enforcement.
Sure.
And, we got to be honest, because that's how we have to live our lives. But you don't have to admit to everything,
Yes.
You don't have to tell them everything.
Yeah.
Because so many times I have clients like, no, the police officer was just so cool. So I cooperated with him and he said he was going to take it easy. And so now this shouldn't be a DUI. I'm like, no, that's not how that works. Like you're just handing them their case. And I mean, in fairness, they're trying to keep the world safe, right? So. Yeah. So you're not making their job. It's not your job to make their job easier. That's what I'm saying.
Exactly.
So, those constitutional rights, like the Fourth Amendment, which is probably the strongest one in this scenario, being, your protection against unlawful search and seizure. So you don't have to say, I can't tell you how many times clients were like, they know what they have. I'm like, come on in. Come on in and search.
They give consent.
Because, they give that consent, and they think they don't have a choice but to do that.
Yes.
So that's something really important that I think it's important to educate people
I think
on.
they feel coerced just by the fact that they are being pulled over and the officer is asking them for a driver's license and this and that, get out of the car. So they get very defensive and they say, okay, go ahead and search everything and open the trunk and... Right?
Yeah, exactly. Here you go.
Sometimes just to show the officer that they don't have anything,
right.
Or,
Yeah. No, and sometimes, honestly, sometimes there's such situations and scenarios where you don't even know what you have, Like maybe you're in somebody else's car. I'm telling you, there's so many ways that it can escalate.
In my culture, in Brazil, we usually think that, okay, if I don't owe anything, I just show them, the officer or the police, that everything is fine with me in my car. I don't have anything. So, go ahead and open it. Go ahead and search.
Right. I have nothing to hide. Right.
Exactly. I don't have anything to hide. So, just to make a correction here, before I said that the BIA had issued a decision in July 2025. It's not correct. That was a recommendation from the Department of Justice, but the decision came in September 2025, and it's a famous case now, Yahudi Hurtado. So just a correction here.
Okay.
With regards to the case law. But you were talking about like driving without a license, and what other types of crimes, like how about domestic violence?
Yeah, that's one. That's
Child abuse. Those are pretty bad crimes with regards also to immigration.
Yes.
They cause a huge impact in immigration.
Right.
Status. So
right.
How about those?
That's fairly common as well. The
common.
family violence cases, and it's very unfortunate because there's two sides to this specific charge. The way I see it, you know, there are some people who absolutely deserve the book thrown at them. Right. There are other people that get caught in a bad relationship. And it doesn't take much to make that call, you know, and it doesn't take much for probable cause to exist. Like there might not be any physical proof, right? But enough for that arrest, enough for that charge, enough for that to be a big headache in the immigration field as well.
Yeah.
So we have to be very careful as criminal defense attorneys in being zealous advocates, because we're not just looking at potential consequences, but you know, consequences that affect real humans and real families, real spouses, and real children. So, domestic violence is definitely a case. But like I said, it's problematic because it just doesn't take much to bring forth that complaint. You know, I can't tell you how many times the spouses call like, "Well, I want to drop the charges." It was just like, it was a situation where we were both fighting, like. I hit him, he like pushed me to get me off him, and I called the police. Like, he's all scratched up, you know, and I'm the one and he's the one that's in jail. So not that I'm excusing that on any front, but it just becomes a little complicated when you're dealing with real human emotions and real human flaws, you know, in our partners as well. It's complicated, but no, once the die is cast, you can't undo it because they can't just drop the charges. You know, perhaps the prosecution won't have a cooperating witness or a cooperating victim.
Yeah.
So, you know, maybe that would be helpful. But like I said, it gets complicated, you know, and then you have to explain that to the immigration authorities. Like, well, no, it wasn't. And my understanding of that is you have to really break apart the statute.
Yes.
Right. And so what were they charged with? What were they convicted of? You know, what did they plead to? And how does that unravel according to immigration?
And we have to compare federal law, state law, and see the categorical approach, like they say. So it's complicated. And I've had clients, they were applying for the U.S. citizen spouse was applying for his immigrant spouse for permanent residence, and they got in a fight, and it was pretty bad, and the U.S. citizen spouse was detained, and well, there was physical abuse and mental abuse, so I had a conflict of interest that would happen. So I cannot be their attorney anymore in the immigration case. And we have to switch from a family petition into a VAWA petition, which is a petition for victims of domestic violence. And so I cannot advocate against the U.S. citizen spouse who was the perpetrator of the violence. So it's weird.
There's so many
and I
ways
cannot be her attorney either. So we have to refer them out and see. And usually they call also and they say, "Oh, I want to drop the charges. Now, it was just a fight. It was just, we weren't in a good day or things like that. So yeah, people have to be careful with that, because when they're fighting, they don't think about the consequences, not only criminal, but immigration consequences, you know. So it's pretty, it's important to bring this awareness to people. Now, it's important to mention here the most common offenses I want to call the attention that can make a non-citizen deported, like the aggravated felonies, murder, rape, sexual abuse of a minor, drug trafficking, theft, possession of stolen property, burglary, if there's 1 year or more sentence imposed, crimes of fraud or deceit where loss to the victim exceeded $10,000, regardless of sentence, forgery, illicit trafficking in firearms, crimes involving moral turpitude, and that includes shoplifting. Like I mentioned at the beginning of our interview, the new act, the Lake and Riley Act, includes shoplifting, even a charge or arrest or conviction, or if admits having committed or admits committing acts which constitute the essential elements of any burglary, theft, larceny, shoplifting, or assault of a law enforcement officer offense, or any crime that results in death or serious bodily injury to another person. That's the Lake and Riley Act. It's pretty harsh on immigrants right now. But controlled substances, domestic violence offenses, firearms, child abuse, anyway. Even a violation of a domestic violence protection order can have pretty bad consequence for immigration purposes. So, Luisa, when you see a case like that, what should a criminal defense attorney try to do to help an immigrant? Somebody comes to your office and say, well, you know, I was charged with possession or drug trafficking or selling marijuana or other type of controlled substance. What should a criminal defense attorney try to do with regards to that offense?
Those are heavy ones. And you know, there's a difference, in my opinion. There's a difference with those true heavy felonies, right, having immigration consequences, than something like shoplifting under the Lake and Riley Act having those same consequences. And that's what I find pretty alarming. As soon as I read it, I thought that leaves it way too open-ended. You know, like the mere accusation or admitting of something that could be, and there's no dollar amount tied to it either. You know, it could just be the misdemeanor. And so that level of consequences is pretty heavy, right? So now, and that's kind of where the difference is. I think there's a lot of mitigation that we can do as criminal defense attorneys to try to get the best resolution possible. So even if we're looking at a felony, and you can tell me more about this, but my understanding is the actual charging document itself, the indictment, has a lot to do with what you do on your end, right? Like you've got to dismantle that on your end as well. So then there's that, right? And then there's what the resolution will be. Like, are we going to take this to trial? Are we going to think that we're going to get a good verdict from it, like a no guilty verdict from a jury? Is that a risk that they're willing to take? Because if they don't and they're guilty, that's going to be way harder from an immigration perspective.
Because now they have a pretty bad criminal history, and that impacts their chances of bond or any immigration relief that they might be.
So then, you know, we go back to mitigation. How do we mitigate? What kind of plea deal can we come up with? What are the facts, right? Like, is there a factual basis for this charge, which I think you would also dismantle on your end? And beyond that is, how creative can we get, right? Like, can we try to keep sentencing? I know what we've done in the past, and it's not that common to do. So I don't, I don't want people to think this is great. We'll just stack up misdemeanors. No, it's not that easy. But for example, like if the plea deal is, it's 3 years probation or something like that, right? For a felony. That's probably not doable for an aggravated felony, by the way, but I'm just giving the example. Maybe we can stack up different misdemeanors, right? And we do like so that way it's never, and it's never the years, it's the months. You know what I mean? Like there's different ways. You don't get to the 12-month. Correct. And we can stack it differently. So we can get very creative with it, but what I would do is we need to get an immigration attorney on board because we need I don't do immigration exclusively. Like you do, I would know, like you'd help me figure out what is going to be the best resolution within what we have. Yes. So it's going to be like, if we're talking about felonies, it's going to be a team effort. And the client has to be an active participant too. It's difficult. Now, if we're talking about misdemeanors, like for example, I think, DUIs can become problematic, right? After a certain point. Yes. Same thing for shoplifting. Well, now shoplifting is problematic from the beginning. Yes. So that could be an issue as well. And so we can try to come up with it's a little bit easier when we're talking about misdemeanors. That's how I'll put it. It's a little bit easier to be, and I've done, for example, like a pretrial diversion deal, and we can talk about that now. Yes, yes. Because diversion could be a very, very good option for some people, because what it does is it withholds conviction as long as you complete all the requirements. It's a whole program. Usually, it's like a combination of like a course and community service. Some combination of that, maybe it's like a theft seminar for shoplifting, something like that. And then they would say, all right, the case is dismissed because you completed this. However, from an immigration perspective, and first of all, you have to qualify for that program, right? But if you do, from an immigration perspective, almost always there's an actual application and petition for pretrial diversion where the person, the defendant, has to admit to the thing. And that's where the issue is. That's tricky. Right. That's where the issue is. And so that doesn't really do anything for you. That doesn't help you in any way when the case gets to you. It's basically the same thing. You didn't have any jail time, So what we've been able to do is to do something, and I've been successful being very honest, and it depends on, what court system you're in, what jurisdiction you're in. But sometimes I can say, listen, this is the very first offense. These are the mitigating factors. Will you agree to some kind of diversion? But like nothing is filed. There's no admission. No admission of guilt. Right. There's no admission of guilt. There's nothing. And we've been able to do that because luckily there's plenty of good-hearted prosecutors out there that understand that, that understand the
implications.
Yeah, especially if you educate them in turn as well. Like, hey, this is like you get your thing, right? Like we just need you to write it up a little differently. Yes. Like I said, not that it's doable in every scenario, but as criminal defense attorneys, sometimes we got to get creative. And sometimes we'll do even more community service. We'll do even more of this. Yes. And sometimes, like I said, it's hard because prosecutors, sometimes it's a case that's so black and white to them. Like, why would we concede anything? Because we know we would win. If we take this trial, we'll win. So it's hard. It's complicated. So every case is a little different, as you know. But there's certainly ways that we can help. Yeah. Yeah, and that's why it's so important to have a criminal defense attorney, right? Since the beginning of the case, because people try to do by themselves and they just screw their case up. So that's true. It's not advisable. Yeah. It's good to have a good criminal defense attorney helping, and an immigration attorney too, so they can work together and see to minimize and mitigate, like you said. Yeah, and hey, if we get a case that's like, we know we can win this at trial, right? Maybe that's another discussion, right? We're gonna take that risk if we know that it's supported. Yes. But for the most part, I would say the truth is somewhere in the middle. Things aren't normally that black and white. There's definitely some gray area, and that's where the mitigation comes in, because it's a question of what's your risk tolerance, especially when it's not just the jail time or what the consequences are
exactly.
here. It's going to be beyond that with immigration.
Yeah, because people usually think, oh, this is just a misdemeanor. It's not going to do anything. And it's not like that. That's why you need somebody who understands the law and the implications, criminal and immigration, also to try to help the people as much as possible. Now, let's talk a little bit about the post-conviction relief. Let's say a person comes to your office and they had like a sentence from 2020 and now they're trying to naturalize, get their U.S. citizenship, and their immigration attorney told them, well, with this conviction, you won't be able to naturalize. Try to find a good criminal defense attorney and get this fixed somehow. How can you do that? Is it always possible? What are the chances?
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about
that. That depends on the case, as you know, right? That's always the answer. Depends. That's the lawyer
It would be
answer.
easier for misdemeanors than felonies. Probably, right?
It's still, probably yes, depending on what the offense is, but it still absolutely depends, because I think the best way to do that would be a motion to vacate, right?
Okay.
So we vacate the whole thing, right? But we have to have a legal basis for doing that. So there's got to be some type of substantive or even procedural reason. And so the classic ones are ineffective assistance of, there has to be a whole analysis, right? So there's got to be okay, did they know the immigration consequences? The Padilla, Kentucky case, right?
Padilla, Kentucky.
Yeah, so that's, everyone needs to understand the collateral consequences of this plea that they're taking, for example, if it's a plea, right? So then we would request a transcript and we would see what did they actually agree and understand to, because the judge at the plea colloquy, the judge would say, you understand, are you a U.S. citizen? You understand this could have immigration implications up to and including to deportation, right? They ask, are you happy with your attorney, right? So they cover all these things. So we look at the transcript and we say, and of course, at early on in the plea colloquy, it's, are you under the influence or anything that could keep you from knowingly doing, or, are you under duress? Are you doing this knowingly and voluntarily, right?
Yeah.
Are you accepting this plea because you are in fact guilty? So there's a lot of safeguards in place for exactly this and many other reasons, So that's where the analysis takes us. We break it down. Is there an argument for, a procedural issue? Did they actually, in fact, not know the collateral consequences? Can we then say there was ineffective assistance of counsel? And if we can, then I think there's a fighting chance to vacate it. But these days, I don't know how successful it is these days. I've done it, but it's not that. It's not that black and white.
Yeah.
So it kind of depends on every, and also again, sometimes you get a very cool DA who's okay, I understand the situation. Now this is where we're at. Most of the time when that happens, it's a much older conviction, not necessarily 5 years old.
Okay.
When they've come to me. So there's actually some
15,
argument.
20 years
Yeah,
ago.
yeah. Before the Padilla case. And that there's actually a fighting chance in that case, in my opinion. There are definitely attorneys that are dedicated to post-conviction relief cases. So in that scenario, I might give somebody a call and say, hey, how would you handle this exactly? Because there's so much that goes to it, right? And there's so much case law that's been established.
Yeah.
But I think that would be one remedy, right, after a conviction. Second, we can talk about record restrictions, but that's not really going to help them because it doesn't restrict anything from immigration eyes. So it doesn't really help. Perhaps if they have an employer that would care about it, maybe record restriction would be something, but that's for a different purpose at that point. Yeah. And then just like a straight appeal, you know, if you lose that trial, you get convicted, appeal it and see if you can, you know, come up with a better resolution at that point.
Yeah.
But once you, and that's kind of the whole point of us doing this, right? Is so that we get it right on the front end and everyone
To
knows.
avoid.
Because it's so much harder to undo
It's so much
anything.
harder to try to vacate.
Yeah, so much harder to undo what's been done. It's really difficult.
Yeah.
So
Again, the importance of having an attorney since the beginning of the case. You know, sometimes people call my office and say, "Oh, but I can go there and just say, okay, I'm going to pay the fine, and you know, it's fine. It's just a traffic offense." And sometimes it's a DUI, and they say, "Well, you know, I wasn't drunk. The officer did this and did that. I don't think he was right." And I say, no, go see a criminal defense attorney because you definitely need one. So you don't plead, you know, guilty or do something that it might hurt your immigration status.
Yeah, even if we're talking about like a traffic ticket, right? If there's a way to improve that, don't you want your insurance to remain? You know, you don't want points on your license. You don't want,
exactly. It's not only for immigration. It's for everything, right? You don't want a bad criminal history, right?
Exactly.
You want to try to mitigate as much as possible, right? So I think we talked about the main changes and the main concerns of the immigrant community today. Okay, thank you so much, Luisa, for educating us. It was very helpful. And any final remarks you would like to
Sure. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.
This has been so fun. It's fun to just talk about the legal issues that, even though we practice in different areas, you know, we feel similar constraints given the time we're living in. So, and you know, if we're feeling it, our clients are feeling it. So thank you so much for offering this program to educate others. And yeah, I can't wait to see what the future brings, right?
Yes.
Right now it's a little constraining like we talked about, but things always get better.
Thank you. Esse foi o Cruzando Fronteiras de hoje. Espero que vocês tenham gostado do programa. E se você gostou, assine o nosso canal, curta lá e clique no sininho para receber as notificações dos próximos programas. E até o próximo.